we start session number 2, part 1, Memorialization of the Holocaust. And the first speaker is Dovid Katz, and he will tell us about state-sponsored collective memory, revisionism in 21st century interaction of Holocaust denial.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you all for coming. My thanks to Rabbi Barkan for having invited me and all of us, and for his beautiful work here in Riga in establishing the Ghetto and Holocaust Museum, and in creating events like this one, where people with different ideas and opinions can come together and share them in a very friendly format. And thank you, dear Olga, for all your patience with such a difficult group of people as we are.
Thank you.
Well, we heard earlier this morning from Edward Jacobs several times about the big issue in Holocaust memorialization, and that is the changing, the revision of the history, the changing of the narrative of the Holocaust into a new narrative that is popularly known as double genocide, or the red-brown equation. Now, this new paradigm has, in many circles in Europe, replaced the old Holocaust denial. I want to make very clear that when I am criticizing policies of Baltic governments, this is not a criticism of the people. I, who am obviously a Jewish guy from New York, have lived very happily for most of the year in Vilnius for many years and been treated wonderfully. I think the Lithuanian people are terrific. This is a critique of certain government policies, not of any peoples in any country. Now, classic Holocaust denial died in the year 2000, when the denier David Irving lost his libel case in London against Deborah Lipstadt, and the High Court judge made his ruling. After that, Holocaust denial was pushed to the far-right fringes of neo-Nazis, far-right, far-left, and others, and was no longer part of polite society. But in the meantime, even as this was happening, a new movement, double genocide, or from the viewpoint of the Holocaust, Holocaust obfuscation, was emerging in post-Soviet nationalist Eastern Europe. Nationalist Eastern Europe includes the understandably anti-Soviet parts of both the European Union and other nations that would like to be part of it. Then there are other agendas that sometimes come into this mix. The fourth point you see here on the screen, straight denial is not possible in places like Lithuania, Latvia, Belarus, Ukraine, where there are hundreds and hundreds of mass graves, where the oldest people know and have told younger people what happened. Denial just doesn't come into it. Then denial is not even necessary when other unfortunate motives, anti-Russian in the ethnic sense, anti-Jewish in the anti-Semitic sense, and nationalist in any sense, come into it. So the effort is to put a lot of state money into writing the Holocaust out of history without denying a single death and without refusing to put up monuments for the Holocaust. For the benefit of foreigners and of ambassadors, many places in this part of the world will happily put up another Holocaust monument. So what's been going on that's problematic is the claim that Nazi and Soviet crimes have to be equal in principle, and to bring that claim into the political arena of the European Union and the European Parliament, as usual, with a fancy barrage of fancy names like reconciliation of European histories. That is Orwellian doublespeak for, you better agree with me or else we can't have two opinions on history. Equality of victimhood. That means that if I don't agree that being sent to Siberia for 10 years is the same as genocide of an entire people, I am not treating victims as equal. So there's been this whole new pressure to stigmatize as far left, pro-Soviet, pro-Russian people who have tried to speak up. Then we come to point B here, which is very, very anti-Semitic, trying to find fault with those who were killed and the survivors, the Holocaust survivor community, by recycling the old tropes of the Jewish communists, the Jewish Bolshevism, into fancy new paradigms of we must investigate how many % were happy that they came under communism instead of Nazism, and all kinds of such research topics. Next, in the 3 Baltic countries and in Western Ukraine, there is a lot of state and governmental support for honoring the perpetrators, for honoring those who helped, who collaborated, and in some cases who actually helped commit the crimes of the genocide of their Jewish neighbor. And then this revisionism can, of course, be spread together with real Holocaust studies. So in the late 1990s, all 3 Baltic countries established what are known as red-brown commissions to study Nazi and Soviet crimes. All 3 Baltic countries redefined genocide legally, broadening the definition. Anti-Semitic discourse returned in a new academic guise. Many people from the West were given honors and medals, and in some countries like Hungary and Lithuania in 2010, the classic Western narrative of one genocide was actually criminalized. Now, even if no one ever goes to prison, I am a witness that it has intimidated young Hungarian and Lithuanian scholars from coming with a second opinion. Every new movement in history needs its constitution, its document. And many people in Holocaust studies have still not studied the Prague Declaration of June 3rd, 2008. It has the word same, S-A-M-E, 5 times. And I'll quickly read you the 5 occurrences. 1. Consciousness of crimes against humanity committed by the communist regimes must inform all European minds to the same extent as the Nazi regime's crimes did. That if it informs my mind to a lesser extent, there's something wrong. This is right out of Orwell and has no place in the European Parliament. 2. Believing that millions of victims of communism and their families are entitled to enjoy justice, sympathy, understanding, and recognition for their sufferings in the same way as the victims of Nazism have been morally and politically recognized. Now, of course, we must recognize the victims of the horrific Soviet crimes. But if we're going to recognize them in the same way, we are saying there was no difference in the crime. Everything is the same. Everything is a mixed-up postmodernist mush. 3, recognition that many crimes committed in the name of communism should be assessed as crimes against humanity involving a warning in the same way Nazi crimes were assessed by the Nuremberg Tribunal. Speaks for itself. Number 4, establishment of 23rd of August, the day of signing of the Hitler-Stalin Pact, as a day of remembrance of the victims of both Nazi and communist totalitarian regimes. And number 5, this is more Orwellian than Orwell, adjustment and overhaul of European history textbooks so children would learn about communism the same way they have been taught to assess Nazi crimes. So if the 5 practical demands of the Prague Declaration are carried out, that is the end of the Holocaust, full stop. Now, what are the motives here? We heard before from Edward that we in America had to make peace and understand and acknowledge what America had done to African Americans, to Native Americans. It's part of the truth of history. But the ultranationalist wants his or her country to always be a pure victim. Then a second motive is anti-minority feelings, especially in the Baltic countries and Western Ukraine. The third motive is very important because it involves a very real problem. I have many Lithuanian friends who tell me quietly, people from various government ministries, Dovid, you're absolutely right, but you don't understand. This is our security against Russia. We're the ones who live next door to Russia. So, NATO and the European Union have to secure the small, vulnerable nations on the periphery of the former Soviet Empire. That is not a license to change history. Coming to Riga this weekend, I noticed in the Herald Tribune a completely analogous commentary by Jonathan Tepperman about Asia, how the happy countries of South Korea, Japan, and China may ruin everything because they're allowing historical obsession to mix into foreign policy. It is a very big mistake. Now, museums that honor and commemorate the Holocaust are worse than worthless, perhaps, if they come alongside memorials for the perpetrators. I will quote the great Lithuanian philosopher who's now a liberal member of the European Parliament, Leonidas Donskis. It's impossible to pursue two mutually exclusive goals. You cannot sympathize with both victims and perpetrators. So let's give a few examples. In Lviv, you have the Lonsky Museum with the famous Photoshop picture of a woman coming to look for her relatives. In the background were all the Jews that had been murdered that week at the end of June 1941. But in the photograph, they are covered with numbers of Ukrainian victims. That's the original photograph. And this is a famous museum, one of whose directors was recently welcomed by the unsuspecting Prime Minister of Canada. And that is the problem, the export of the new fake history. In the Eastern European Union, you had in Estonia, for example, the whole conflict over the Lihula monument, but to Estonia's credit, under pressure from the EU and the United States, the monument was moved in 2004 from public to private premises, which is a big conceptual difference. In private places, people commemorate who they wish, and when the state commemorates something, it's making a statement. Here in Latvia, you had the whole incident of the Bauska monument and the now famous letter of Sukharenko of the Jewish community to the Prime Minister about the monument and the failure to put up a monument for the victims. This is taken as triumphalism against the last survivors, and it's the worst possible message, the honoring of any allies of Hitler, although in this case it's the Waffen-SS rather than direct perpetrators. Here in Riga, each 16th of March, some of us, under the leadership of Joe Koren and others, often meet to protest the Waffen-SS glorification events. Very important that the people who come to protest are people like Joel Rubenfeld of the European Jewish Congress. There are people like Gerd Weiskirchen, the well-known German parliamentarian. They are people from the center. They are people from the mainstream. They are not loony leftists or people far from the mainstream. In Lithuania, we have the problem that the actual perpetrators, the white armbanders of June 1941, the Lithuanian Activist Front and their supporters, who began the murders of Jews in 40 or so locations before the Germans came, are repeatedly honored by the state. There's one of the leaders of the LAF, Shkirpa, who was to be the provisional government's prime minister, but in the end didn't. He made very hateful radio addresses urging violence against the Jews. There's a street in central Vilnius at the corner of a popular art museum named for him. That should come down, period, if we're going to be serious about honoring the victims. That's another one in Kaunas. In Vilnius, there's a 23rd of June street, 23rd of June, marking the onset of the Lithuanian Holocaust, and the very lame historical attempts to turn it into some anti-Soviet revolt don't help much. This is from an exhibit not too long ago at the so-called Genocide Museum, Museum of Genocide Victims in central Vilnius. In Auschwitz, we were given some spinach and a little bread. War is terrible. In other words, this constant comparison of suffering, the local point of which is to make the Holocaust look like the minor of two evils. In 2012, very many people and friends of Lithuania were shocked at the government's decision to reinter with full honors the actual 1941 Nazi puppet prime minister who had signed the papers, co-signed the German order for a concentration camp. It was actually the mass murder camp of the 7th Fort, and a second order for all the Jews of his city, Kaunas Kovno, to be put in a ghetto. At the university in that town there is a lecture hall named for him. And I want to conclude with this point. When there is a neo-Nazi march, as there was in Kaunas on February 16th, there were less than 10 of us protesting against about 1,000 neo-Nazis. Who is on the front flag of the neo-Nazi march? Not Hitler, not a swastika, but this Nazi puppet prime minister. So we have the problem in these countries that the governments are honoring the same Nazi collaborators that the neo-Nazis are honoring, even though the government does not share other goals of the neo-Nazis. This is a very, very important point, the juxtaposition between the two. I wanted to talk a little bit about free speech and also swastikas. Very, very finally, there are at least 5 heroic escapees from ghettos, Jewish Holocaust survivors, and if you look them up on Wikipedia, you'll find that they're also war criminals because anti-Semitic prosecutors in Vilnius have still not issued a public apology, which we hope they will soon do. So there are attempts to smear the victims, to glorify the perpetrators, to mix it all up, and to honor everybody. It's an attempt to revise history, and the Prague Declaration is its constitution, and we have to be very careful and cautious approaching this part of the world. This is a typical Holocaust summary cartoon from a popular blog, Zeppelinus in Lithuania. He was recently exposed as having a high position in the economics ministry. It says, "Thank you for our victory." The ugly, hairy Jew is saying thank you to the Red Army soldier as everything is burning and there's a raped, murdered blonde woman in the lower left-hand corner. So this is the popular imagination correlate of the government version. So thank you, and if there are any questions, I'd like to also leave you the card of our website, defendinghistory.com. I had put out some, but if anybody needs more, and if any questions.
Okay, thank you, Dovid.
No.
Yeah. So please, any questions? Don't be shy.
Don't be afraid. We're here to disagree.
Yeah.
Но будет хороший перевод. Я плохо понимаю. Да. But you will maybe tell.
Yeah, maybe you can translate it. Еду Аустине.
Скажите, Довид, можете ли вы провести какую-то, хотя бы критериальную границу, которая отделит концепцию двойного геноцида как отрицание Холокоста от нормального научного исследования сравнительного нацистского и сталинских преступлений. То есть можете ли вы дать критериальную границу, которая позволит сказать, вот это нормальное научное исследование сравнительное двух тоталитарных режимов, а вот это концепция двойного геноцида и отрицание Холокоста? Спасибо.
Спасибо. I will, I think, try in English.
Yeah.
And that one. There is absolutely room for genuine research comparing any A, B, C, and D in the world. You can compare quantity, motive, result. Such research has always gone on, and it will always go on. When history is taken out of the free arena of open, fair, confident institutions and scholars arguing with each other, and it's made into resolutions in the European Parliament, and it's made into laws that if you disagree you're a criminal and you can be put on trial, then one version of history is being elevated to law, to national policy, and the second opinion is being criminalized. That's point one. Point two, in this particular case, let's go together through Lithuania, through Latvia, and we will together, thank God, we will find many Lithuanians and Latvians and Poles and Russians, but we will find hundreds of towns without one Jew, because there was a genocide and nobody was left. So to say that that event, that is so much of a different empirical magnitude, to say that it is different is a crime, is obviously a pro-fascist manipulation of history that becomes more so when it comes with glorification of perpetrators by the state, not by family members or groups or whatever. So this is a state campaign to change the history, and it's to change it with that word same or equal, which is the basis of the term double genocide.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dovid, one more time.
Thank you very much.